My sister looked me in the eye and said I was too poor to host Thanksgiving. Just like that. Like money was all that mattered. The camera would be tight on my face, but I wouldn't be crying. Not yet. Just steady. Focused. My kids had already made little place cards. They spent all week drawing turkeys in crayon, hanging them in the window, counting down the days, and I had to tell them no one was coming. My name is Elena Meyer. I'm a single mom of 2. I work night shifts at the hospital and come home to 2 bright-eyed kids who don't care if our plates match or if the turkey's from the discount freezer bin. They care that we're together, that we sit at the table, say what we're thankful for, and laugh over pie. That's what Thanksgiving has always meant in our house. But this year, my family decided something else mattered more. My sister Marla and her husband invited everyone to her brand new house in the suburbs. Big kitchen, granite countertops, a formal dining room she's never used. She called me 4 days before Thanksgiving and said, "It's just better this way." I didn't argue. I didn't ask why no one stood up for me. I didn't say anything at all, because if I spoke, I knew I wouldn't be able to hold it together. I just smiled and told the kids it would be a small dinner this year, just the 3 of us. They tried to be brave, but on Thanksgiving morning, I set our little table anyway. Bella placed her paper crafts carefully at each seat. Luca folded napkins like he'd seen in a restaurant once, all proud. I tried to keep it together. Then I heard it, a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Not a single person had texted me that morning. My sister hadn't even sent a generic Happy Thanksgiving. So when I opened the door, I was stunned. A man in a black jacket stood holding 2 massive silver trays, steam curling out from beneath the lids. Behind him, a delivery truck, the kind you'd see outside a wedding venue or upscale catering hall. He glanced at a clipboard and asked, "Elena Meyer?" I nodded, too confused to speak. "Thanksgiving delivery," he said, "whole spread. Someone sent this for you." I stared at the trays, smelled rosemary, butter, pumpkin spice, real mashed potatoes, gravy, pecan pie. Inside the box was a simple white envelope, no return address, just my name. I opened it. The card said, "From the person you forgot." And before I could even process what that meant, before I could blink, another knock. I opened the door again, and standing there was my grandfather. He looked straight at me and said, "They can eat at Marla's if they want. I'm eating here." He walked past me, took off his coat, and nodded toward the table. And that's when everything started to change. People think Thanksgiving is about food, the turkey, the stuffing, the pie. But it's not. Not really. It's about who you share it with. It's about stories over mashed potatoes and remembering who brought the burnt rolls last year. It's about belonging. And for the last 5 years, Thanksgiving belonged to us. Me, my kids, and the rest of my family. In our little house with the scuffed-up floors and the mismatched plates. After my mom passed, everyone naturally started coming to my place. I think they saw it as neutral ground. My sister Marla had her own perfect life with her picture-perfect decor. But my place, it felt warm. It felt like mom's. I'm Elena Meyer. I'm 35, a nurse, and a single mom to 2 kids who have no idea how hard I work to make our world feel whole. I never planned on raising them alone. Their father left when Bella was just a baby. He didn't leave a note, just his silence. But we managed. Our home is small, a 2-bedroom rental in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town. It's the kind of place where you can smell what your neighbor's cooking if the windows are open. In the fall, leaves pile up in the backyard and the front steps creak if you put your weight in the wrong spot. It's not glamorous, but it's ours. This year, the kids were more excited than ever. Bella, my 7-year-old, made paper garlands in fall colors and hung them across the archway between the living room and kitchen. Luca, who's 10 and already thinks like an artist, sketched a cornucopia in colored pencil and taped it above the dining table. They asked every day how many people were coming, what time Grandpa would arrive, whether Aunt Janice was bringing her famous sweet potatoes. I didn't have much to spend. Between rent, groceries, and the car needing new tires, I had to budget every dollar. But I planned carefully, bought ingredients over 3 paychecks, picked up a turkey breast instead of a full bird, found a recipe online for homemade rolls that only needed flour, yeast, and a little love. The plan was tight, but it felt good. Familiar, like I could still give my kids something to hold on to. The kitchen was where I felt closest to my mom. She used to hum when she cooked, always barefoot, always a little flour on her cheek by the time the pie was in the oven. I caught myself humming once. Same tune she used to sing, and it brought tears to my eyes. I wiped them quickly. The kids were watching. There's a photo of her on our fridge. She's holding a spatula, standing next to me at 14. That Thanksgiving, she let me make the green bean casserole by myself. She called it the beginning of the handoff. I didn't know then how fast that handoff would come. I just knew I wanted to make her proud. When the weather started getting colder, the kids pulled out the Thanksgiving decorations from the storage bin in the closet. Bella found a ceramic turkey she accidentally chipped last year and said, "He's still cute. We can put him on the windowsill." Luca made a list of who would sit where. He drew little cards with everyone's name, added doodles. "I put a leaf on Grandpa Frank's because he loves raking," he told me, grinning. They didn't see how tired I was. They just saw a mom who made holidays feel like magic. I never told them how much I worried, how late I stayed up checking bank balances and coupon codes, how every year I quietly hoped no appliance would break before Thanksgiving Day. I didn't let them see that side. They deserved joy, not stress. They deserved the version of Thanksgiving where everything feels warm and full. So I planned. I prepared. I smiled. When Marla called 4 days before Thanksgiving and said, "It's just better if we host this year," I felt something in my chest tighten. She said it so smoothly, like it had already been decided by everyone but me. I looked at my kitchen after that call, at the hand-traced turkeys taped to the fridge, at the grocery list on the counter, at my daughter's cut-out construction paper pumpkins taped to each dining chair. I took a deep breath and said nothing. Because in that moment, I still believed they'd remember what this kitchen meant, what it held, what we'd built here year after year. But I was wrong. It happened on a Monday, 4 days before Thanksgiving. I had just gotten home from a long shift at the hospital. I was standing at the stove stirring a pot of canned soup when my phone buzzed. It was Marla. I hesitated before answering. She never called unless it was about some family announcement or her latest home project. Her voice was calm but clipped. "Elena, we've all been talking," she began. I felt my stomach tighten. "We just think it might be better if I host Thanksgiving this year." I blinked. "What?" "I mean, your place is just kind of small, you know? It's been tight the last few years. And you've been working a lot. It's probably a relief, right?" A relief. That's what she called it. I didn't say anything, I just listened. Soup started to bubble over, but I let it. I couldn't take my eyes off the drawing Luca had taped to the fridge. It said, "Welcome Family," in crooked letters with a hand-drawn table underneath it, all 12 chairs filled in. Marla kept talking. "Look, it's not a big deal. It's just that with the kids running around and everything, my place has more room. Greg's got the outdoor heaters set up, and the kitchen is big enough to hold everyone." "It's always been at my place," I said quietly. "Right, but that was before," she replied, as if that meant anything at all. "We just thought this year it might be more comfortable." "We?" I asked. She hesitated. "Well, yeah, everyone agreed it would be easier." Everyone. That word hit hard. Not just Marla, not just her husband, my Uncle Roy, my Aunt Janice, my cousin Mia, even Grandpa Frank, maybe. None of them thought I was worth defending. No one called to say, "We want to come to your place like always." No one checked to see how I felt. I felt myself shrinking, holding the phone tighter like I was holding the last thread of something fragile. I told her, "Sure, that's fine." She said, "Great. I knew you'd understand." Then she hung up, like it was nothing. Like she hadn't just swept away 5 years of tradition in a 30-second phone call. When I turned around, Bella was standing there in her fuzzy socks, holding a paper turkey she had just finished coloring. "Mom, was that Aunt Marla?" I nodded. "Is she coming early to help?" she asked. I couldn't lie fast enough. "Actually, sweetheart, Thanksgiving's going to be a little different this year." Her face dropped. "Are we not having it here?" I forced a smile. "We're going to have a small one. Just us, a cozy dinner." "But I already made decorations. I was going to sing the thankful song for everybody." "I know, baby." She looked at the table where she had set out her hand-drawn napkin rings. "Why doesn't anyone want to come?" "It's not about that," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. She walked to her room and closed the door without another word. Luca came out a few minutes later. He had overheard enough to know. He didn't cry, he just asked, "Should I take the banner down?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to say they were wrong, that we were still hosting, that none of it mattered, but I couldn't. Not when my voice was already shaking. He pulled the construction paper banner off the wall himself, folded it carefully, didn't look at me as he did it. That night I stayed up after they went to bed. I sat in the living room with the lights off, staring at the empty table. I thought about canceling everything. Maybe I'd pick up a pizza, watch a movie with the kids, try to make the day pass quietly. Maybe if I said nothing, it wouldn't hurt as much. But then I looked around that little room, and I saw what they had built. What I had built. A house that held every laugh from every holiday since my mom passed. A place where my children knew they belonged. A place filled with glue-sticked crafts and burnt rolls and love. And that's when I made my decision. We would still have Thanksgiving, even if no one came. The morning before Thanksgiving, I stood in the grocery store staring at the last shelf of cranberry sauce. 2 cans left. I picked one up, held it in my hand, and thought about how my mom used to joke that it didn't matter if it was fresh or from a can, as long as it was on the table. She always put it in the same white dish with the little blue flowers around the rim. I still had that dish, tucked in the cabinet behind the chipped mugs. I dropped the can into the basket and moved on. 1 small turkey breast, a bag of potatoes, green beans, 2 boxes of stuffing mix, and a frozen pie. I didn't have enough for anything fancy, but I had enough. I kept reminding myself that it wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about showing my kids that love didn't leave just because people did. Back home, Bella was cutting out paper leaves and writing words on them like hope and family. Luca had drawn a new sign. It was simpler than the first one, just the word thankful in block letters, taped to the front door. They didn't ask if anyone was coming. They knew the answer, but they kept working. I think we were all trying to pretend it felt normal. That evening, I prepped everything I could. I boiled the potatoes and seasoned the turkey. I set the table with the same dishes we always used, mismatched and chipped, but clean and full of memory. I folded napkins and placed Bella's paper leaves at each spot. I put the cranberry sauce in Mom's dish. Later, when the kids were asleep, I sat down and stared at the table. 3 seats. I thought about putting away the extra chairs, but I couldn't do it. It felt like giving up, like letting them win. So I left them, even if no one would sit in them. I wanted my children to walk into that room and see a holiday, not a disappointment. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept getting up to check the turkey in the fridge, the pie on the counter, the seating arrangement. Around 4 in the morning, I finally sat down in the kitchen and cried for the first time. Not loud, just quiet tears while everyone else slept. I let it out and then got up and wiped my face because the day was here, and it was mine whether anyone showed up or not. Thanksgiving morning was gray, cold but not snowing. I turned on the oven and put the turkey in, set the music low, and tried to hum the song my mom used to hum. The kids came out in their pajamas, hair messy, still half asleep but smiling. "Is it just us?" Bella asked. I nodded. "Just us." She smiled a little. "That's okay." We cooked together. I let them stir the stuffing and mash the potatoes. Bella snuck bites of pie filling when she thought I wasn't looking. Luca folded napkins into triangles and told me he saw it on a cooking show. They didn't complain. They didn't ask questions. They just helped. By noon, the house smelled like cinnamon and rosemary. The candles were lit. The table was set. I'd changed out of my pajamas and put on the sweater my mom gave me the last year she was alive. The kids were dressed. Everything looked ready. But the house was quiet. No knocks, no phones buzzing, no cars pulling up. Just the 3 of us standing in the living room looking toward the door like maybe someone would remember. I was about to call them to the table when it happened. A knock. Sharp, confident, unexpected. I walked slowly to the door, heart pounding. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't told anyone I was still hosting. I opened it, and standing there was a man in a black jacket with a clipboard in one hand and steam rising behind him from trays in a large delivery cart. "Thanksgiving order for Elena Meyer?" he asked. I froze. "I didn't order anything," he smiled. "Well, someone did. Full catered meal. Everything you need." I stared at him, then at the silver trays, the warm scents drifting toward me. He handed me a small envelope with my name on the front. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a simple card, no name, just 6 words written in neat handwriting, "From the person you forgot." And in that moment, I didn't feel forgotten at all. I stood in the doorway, frozen, still holding the card. From the person you forgot. I read it again as if the words would change. They didn't. I looked up at the delivery driver, waiting for a hint, a name, something that would tell me who had done this. He just smiled and said, "Where should I put the food?" I stepped aside. Kitchen straight ahead. He wheeled in tray after tray, a full roasted turkey, golden and crisp, sage stuffing, sweet potatoes glazed with brown sugar, 2 kinds of pie, real whipped cream, a basket of fresh dinner rolls, still warm. Everything smelled like home, like the kind of Thanksgiving I thought we had lost. I stood in the kitchen and watched him unpack the trays with practiced hands. He didn't say much. When he was done, he tipped his cap and handed me a receipt that showed nothing but zeros. "It's covered," he said. Then he turned and left. I heard Bella behind me whisper, "Mom, did you do all this?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart, someone else did." Luca stepped closer to the table and stared at the food, eyes wide. "This looks like something from one of Grandpa's stories." Before I could answer, another knock came. I turned, my heart racing again. I walked to the door and opened it. There, standing on my porch in a wool coat and a flat cap, was my grandfather, Frank Meyer, 78 years old, former Army sergeant, the kind of man who only speaks when he means it. He looked me in the eyes and said, "They can eat at Marla's if they want. I'm eating here." He stepped inside without waiting for an answer, took off his coat and laid it neatly over the back of a chair. Then he turned toward the table. "Well," he said, "somebody set this up right. Who made the napkins into triangles?" Luca beamed. "I did." Grandpa nodded. "That's the kind of detail that makes a meal feel special." He sat down in his usual seat at the head of the table, the same seat he took every year in our house. Then he looked up at me. "I know what they said, and I know what they didn't say, but I also know this is where your mother would have wanted to be." I felt something in my chest crack open, not from sadness, but from relief, from the weight of finally being seen. Then came another knock. I opened the door, and there was my Aunt Janice. She was holding a bowl of her famous sweet potatoes, still steaming, her eyes already watery. "I'm sorry, Elena," she said. "I should have said something." Behind her was Uncle Roy carrying a bag of drinks. Then came Mia, my cousin, holding her toddler in one arm and a dish of mac and cheese in the other. "I told Marla I wasn't feeling well," she said with a small laugh. I guess I lied. Each of them stepped inside, eyes soft, hands full, no one needing to explain much. They knew they had followed the crowd, and now they were choosing differently. Soon my little house was filled with voices and footsteps and the sound of chairs scraping across the floor. The candles flickered. The kids ran from room to room showing their crafts and drawings. Then, finally, Marla arrived. She stood at the door with a casserole dish in her hands and a look on her face like she wasn't sure if she belonged. I opened the door but said nothing. She stepped inside, looked at the table, then at Grandpa. "I didn't know everyone would come here," she said, her voice low. Grandpa didn't look up from his plate. He just said, "Maybe next time, don't forget who the heart of this family is." No one spoke for a moment. Then Bella walked up to her and said, "You can sit next to me if you want." Marla blinked, nodded, and followed her to the table. When we all sat down, the room felt full in the best way. Full of food, yes, but also full of something that had been missing for a while. Gratitude, forgiveness, presence. Grandpa raised his glass. "To Elena," he said, "who made this house a home and never needed anyone's permission to do it." Everyone raised their glasses, even Marla, and that was the Thanksgiving I didn't host, but it was the one that reminded everyone what family really means. The day after Thanksgiving, I stood in my kitchen surrounded by empty pie tins, stacked plates, and crumpled napkins. The house was quiet again. The warmth still lingered, not just from the oven, but from the people who had filled the space with laughter, stories, and something we hadn't shared in a long time: honesty. It had been the most unexpected Thanksgiving of my life. Not because of the food or the surprise delivery, or even the moment Grandpa walked through the door like it was never a question where he belonged. What made it unforgettable was the shift. Something in the air had changed. The lines between pride and resentment, between silence and truth, had finally cracked. Bella sat at the kitchen table with a piece of pumpkin pie for breakfast. She had her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm and was humming softly as she licked whipped cream off her fork. Luca was on the floor nearby sketching a new Thanksgiving banner. This one had all our names on it, including Grandpa's, Aunt Janice's, even Marla's. I asked him, "You're adding everyone?" He nodded. "They came, didn't they?" I smiled. "Yes, they did." He looked up at me. "Will we host again next year?" I thought about it. Not the logistics, not the grocery budget or the dishes or the space. I thought about what it meant for him to ask that. I thought about what it meant to finally feel chosen without asking to be. "Yes," I said. "I think we will." That night, after the kids went to bed, I found the card again. I had left it on the mantel, still sealed in the envelope it came in. 6 words that rewrote the day. From the person you forgot. I read them again, slower this time. I thought about who it could have been. At first, I believed it was Grandpa. It made sense. The timing, the message, the way he walked in like the head of the table had never moved. But something in his eyes when he saw the food said otherwise. He had been surprised too. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe Mia. Maybe one of the nurses from work. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the point wasn't who sent it, but what it reminded me of. That I mattered. That being overlooked doesn't mean being invisible forever. That sometimes, when people finally see what's missing, they come back. And sometimes, you don't need to chase them to remind them who you are. For years, I let myself believe that gratitude was about being quiet, about keeping my head down and accepting whatever was given. I thought hosting Thanksgiving was a privilege I had to earn, that I had to prove I was good enough, stable enough, successful enough to belong. But that day, I learned something different. I wasn't too poor to host Thanksgiving. I was too underestimated, too easy to dismiss, too quiet about what I gave, and maybe that's what needed to change. The truth is, families don't fall apart because of money. They fall apart because people stop showing up for each other. They fall apart when traditions turn into obligations and love gets measured by square footage and serving platters. This year, no one brought matching dishes. People sat wherever there was space. The kids spilled juice. We ran out of forks halfway through dessert, and yet it was the most beautiful Thanksgiving we'd ever had. Because it wasn't about appearances. It was about presence. About humility, about coming back when it would have been easier to stay away. Marla sent me a text that night. No long apology. Just one sentence. "Thank you for reminding me what matters." It was enough. I don't know what next year will bring, but I do know this. In my little house with its scuffed floors and chipped plates, we will celebrate again because we have roots here. We have history. And now, we have a future that feels more whole. I'll keep the card in my drawer, not to remember the pain, but to remember the turning point, to remember that sometimes being forgotten is the beginning of being seen again. And if anyone ever tells me I'm too poor to host Thanksgiving, I'll invite them anyway, because now I know exactly what I'm rich in. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, made you think about your own family, or reminded you what really matters during the holidays, I'd love for you to be part of this community. Please like the video if it meant something to you. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. And comment below, tell me, what does Thanksgiving mean to you? If you'd like to hear more real stories about life, family, and the moments that change everything, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell so you don't miss what's coming next. From my home to yours, thank you for being here. I never thought my daughter's wedding would be the place I'd have to watch her heart break all over again. It started with a champagne glass tapping gently against a plate. Carter stood up. He smiled, that fake courtroom smile of his, the one he wore when he wanted people to think he still mattered. "I'm paying for this," he said, raising his glass, "so I'll speak." The room hushed. People turned their heads, half curious, half uneasy. Felt my stomach twist. He'd already been cold all morning, checking his watch more than he checked on his daughter. He began with pleasantries. A joke about how long the ceremony was, something light about the food. Guests laughed. My daughter, Lila, smiled politely. I could see it wasn't real. Then his voice shifted. Lila's grown into a beautiful woman, he said. She's smart, strong, and hopefully, he turned toward the groom, her new husband can handle damaged goods. Laughter. Actual laughter. Small, awkward, confused, but real. Lila froze. Her hand stopped midair, holding her wine glass just below her lips. Her eyes didn't move, just locked on nothing. I felt the rage crawl up my throat. I pushed back my chair. I was ready to stand, to say something, to scream if I had to. No one, not even him, was going to humiliate my daughter like that. But before I could speak, Elias moved. He didn't say a word. He just walked slowly across the floor, steady as ever. When he reached Lila, he knelt beside her and handed her a folded letter. She looked at him, eyes wide and glassy. He didn't explain. He just said, "He doesn't deserve this moment. Read it." The room fell into silence so deep it felt like everyone forgot how to breathe. Lila always imagined her wedding day as a kind of homecoming, not to a place but to a feeling she had only known in pieces. Safety, celebration, being surrounded by people who loved her without condition. For months, she planned every detail. The soft blush flowers, the live jazz quartet, the garden archway her stepfather built by hand. It wasn't just a wedding. It was her moment to step into a future that finally felt like hers. That morning, she was radiant. Her dress flowed like it belonged in a dream. When I helped zip up the back, she looked over her shoulder in the mirror and said, "Do I look okay?" I smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "You look like everything good in this world," I said, and I meant every word. She had been through more than most women her age. She deserved peace, laughter, and a room full of people who saw her as whole. She especially deserved a father who would protect that moment, not try to steal it. Carter hadn't been that father for a long time. When Lila was 12, he left, one of those slow exits disguised as ambition. More meetings, more hours at the firm, more nights he didn't come home. Eventually, he moved out and told her it was best this way. Then he stopped calling. No explanation, just absence. What hurt Lila most wasn't that he left. It was that when he did show up, birthdays, graduations, he treated her like a prop in some redemption story he never earned. When I met Elias, I wasn't looking for a second chance at love. I was focused on raising my daughter and trying to keep the pieces from cutting us too deep, but Elias was steady in a way I hadn't known before, kind, quiet, and deeply present. He never tried to replace Carter. He just showed up. The first time he helped Lila with her math homework, he sat for 2 hours while she cried in frustration. He didn't flinch. He didn't quit. He just stayed. By the time she was 14, she stopped calling him Elias and started calling him Dad. She did it on her own, no push from me, no awkward conversation. Just one day, she walked into the kitchen, pointed at a drawing she made for school, and said, "I made this for Dad." And he smiled without blinking, like he had always been waiting for her to say it. So when Lila got engaged, it made sense that Elias would walk her down the aisle. She asked him with a handwritten note. He read it in silence, nodded, and pulled her into the kind of hug only a real father knows how to give. Carter wasn't happy, but he didn't say much. Instead, he offered to pay for the wedding. He said it was the least he could do. I should have known that phrase wasn't generosity. It was a warning. Lila was hesitant. I remember her asking me, "Do you think it's a trap?" And I said, "Honey, it doesn't matter who pays. What matters is who's there when it counts." She nodded, but I could see the uncertainty still flickering behind her eyes. The day of the wedding, Carter arrived late. His tie was too loose, his cologne too strong. He shook hands with people he barely remembered and smiled like he was the one giving her away. I stayed out of his way. I didn't want a scene. I just wanted the day to go smoothly for Lila. As the ceremony began, Elias stood beside her at the back of the aisle. He looked calm, but I could see the emotion in his eyes. The music started. She reached out and took his arm, and the way she looked at him, that small, grateful glance, said everything. She walked toward her future, holding on to the man who had actually walked with her through life. The ceremony went perfectly. Vows, rings, the kiss. Everyone clapped, even Carter, though he didn't look like he meant it. At the reception, Lila twirled across the dance floor with Jonah, her new husband, laughing in the kind of full-bodied way that made people fall in love with her. For a moment, I let myself believe Carter would stay quiet, that maybe, for once, he'd understand this wasn't about him. I was wrong, because when he stood up to give his toast, I saw that old glint in his eyes, the one that said he wasn't here to celebrate her. He was here to remind her who used to hold the power, and in that moment, everything began to unravel. The room was glowing. Candles flickered on every table. Lila was laughing, cheeks flushed from dancing, her hand wrapped around Jonah's as they whispered to each other between bites of cake. Her veil had been tucked away, but the pins still shimmered in her hair. She looked like she had finally stepped into her own life. Elias and I stood off to the side, watching her. We weren't the kind of parents who hovered, but we knew how much this day meant, not just for her, but for us too. We had waited years to see her safe, joyful, unburdened. I leaned into Elias and said, "We did it." He just smiled, one of those small smiles that said everything without a word. Then we heard it, the sound of a champagne flute tapping against the side of a plate. It was sharp, too sharp, the kind of sound that slices through 100 conversations at once. Carter was standing. He held his glass high and wore that crooked smile I'd seen 100 times in courtrooms and conference rooms, the kind of smile that says he's not here to share, he's here to perform. "I'm paying for this," he said, scanning the room, "so I'll speak." Lila froze, her head turned slowly toward him. Jonah reached for her hand, sensing something had shifted. A few guests gave polite applause, assuming a father's toast would be sweet, maybe emotional. I knew better. I felt the skin on the back of my neck tighten. Carter cleared his throat. "First of all," he said, "what a beautiful evening. The food, the music, my compliments to whoever chose the open bar, laughter, the light kind, people relaxing, waiting for the emotional part." He turned toward Lila and Jonah, eyes gleaming. "I just want to say how proud I am of my daughter. She's grown into a strong, impressive woman. She's been through a lot." He paused. "A whole lot. And hopefully her new husband can handle damaged goods." Silence. Then a few short, uncertain laughs. The kind of laughter people give when they're not sure if something was meant to be funny. I saw faces twist in confusion, embarrassment, discomfort. Lila didn't laugh. She didn't blink. Her body stiffened as if she'd been slapped in front of everyone. My heart cracked open. That wasn't a joke. That was a wound Carter had been waiting to reopen for years, and he did it in front of everyone she loved, at her wedding, in a room where she should have felt untouchable. I stood. My body moved before my mind caught up. I wasn't going to let him have the last word. Not again. Not here. I didn't care that people were watching. I didn't care that it was his money on the bill. I would burn the whole night down if it meant shielding her from that kind of cruelty. Then I felt a hand on my wrist. Elias. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He gave me one look, and I knew. He had this. And more importantly, Lila needed him more than she needed me in that moment. He walked forward, quiet but certain. The kind of walk that made people move out of his way without thinking. He reached Lila's table and knelt beside her. Her face was still pale, her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitch near her ear. He whispered something I couldn't hear. Then he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and placed it in her hand. She looked at it, confused. He whispered again, just one sentence. "He doesn't deserve this moment. Read it." The entire room watched in complete silence. Even Carter sat back down, slowly, eyes narrowing in irritation. He hadn't expected to be challenged. He never does. Not by me, not by anyone. Certainly not by the man who had quietly replaced him in every way that ever mattered. Lila's fingers shook slightly as she unfolded the letter. Jonah reached for her hand again, grounding her. I held my breath. So did everyone else. Something had shifted. You could feel it. The music had stopped. Glasses sat untouched. The air had weight. No one was sure what was happening, but we all knew something important was about to be said. Something real. And for the first time that day, Carter wasn't in control. Lila looked down at the folded paper in her hand like it might burn her fingers. Her lashes fluttered, but she didn't blink. Her throat moved as she swallowed, slow and stiff. Then she unfolded the letter. The paper made a soft sound as it opened, but it was the loudest thing in the room. Every fork, every whisper, every breath had stopped. She took one last glance at Elias, still kneeling beside her, then rose from her seat. Her chair scraped gently against the floor as she stood. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The quiet in the room made it feel amplified, sharp and trembling all at once. She began to read. "To my daughter, you are not damaged. You are healing. There is a difference, and it matters." Her voice caught for half a second, but she kept going. "You were never broken. You were growing. The pain you carried was never yours to begin with. It came from silence, from absence, from promises made and then taken back without explanation." The guests leaned in. Every word landed like stone in water. Ripples moved across the faces in the crowd, bridesmaids, old neighbors, distant relatives, all watching this young woman unravel and rebuild in real time. "I have watched you try to make sense of why he wasn't there. I saw you wait for calls that didn't come. I saw you smile through tears when he missed birthdays, performances, your first college visit, and I saw the way you still hoped. You always hoped." Her hands gripped the letter tighter. Aaliyah stood slowly behind her, not close enough to interrupt, but close enough to be steady if she faltered. "You asked me once if it made sense to keep hoping, if it was foolish to keep loving someone who forgot to love you back. I didn't know how to answer then, but I do now. It wasn't foolish. It was brave. Because you never gave up on the idea that you were worth loving." She glanced toward Carter. He didn't move. His expression was frozen somewhere between a frown and disbelief. He wasn't used to being addressed like this, certainly not publicly, not by his own daughter. She continued, "Carter Halden paid for this wedding. He paid for the venue, the food, the music, and I'm sure he'll remind people of that for years to come. But love isn't paid for with checks. It's paid for with presence." Lila's voice grew stronger, like each sentence built a platform beneath her feet. "The man who stood beside me today is the man who stayed. He stayed when I cried over boys and school and college rejection letters. He stayed when I panicked about growing up. He was there at every softball game, every science fair, every small moment that didn't need to be big to matter." She paused just long enough for the air to settle. "He never asked me to call him Dad. He earned it." A quiet gasp rippled through the crowd. No drama, just truth. "And to my husband, Jonah," she said, turning slightly, "this is the family you're marrying into. Not perfect, but real. Not loud, but loyal." Jonah stood up and wrapped an arm around her waist. She let the letter fall to the table. Elias reached out and placed a hand on her back. It wasn't staged. It wasn't meant for an audience. It was what family looks like when no one's watching. People began to clap, soft at first, then louder, not the usual applause you hear at speeches. This wasn't polite, it was grateful, honest, necessary. Carter sat motionless. He looked smaller now, not humiliated, just irrelevant. He had walked into that room believing he still had power over her, and in under 5 minutes, she showed him he never did. Lila turned to Elias and whispered something only he could hear. He smiled, eyes wet but proud. He didn't need credit. He never had. I looked around the room and saw what I had prayed for since Lila was a girl. No shame, no doubt, no ache that she couldn't name. Just light. Finally unfiltered. She had spoken, and now she was free. She was. When Lila finished reading the letter, she stood perfectly still. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice never cracked. She didn't look to the crowd for approval. She didn't glance at Carter again. She didn't need to. The letter had done what years of silence never could. It gave voice to the ache she carried, and it made something undeniably clear to every single person in that room. Carter Halden was no longer the father in her story. The applause grew, not wild or chaotic. It was thoughtful, deliberate, rising like a wave. I saw faces soften, tears wiped away discreetly. A few people who had laughed during Carter's toast now looked at the floor. Some exchanged quiet glances, uncomfortable with what they had just been part of. The atmosphere had changed. This wasn't a party anymore. It was something deeper. Jonah leaned in and kissed Lila on the forehead. She smiled, but her eyes didn't leave Elias. She stepped toward him, arms open. He met her halfway. Their embrace was slow and full. Elias pulled her into his chest and held her with both arms wrapped tightly around her. He didn't speak. He just pressed his hand gently against the back of her head like he used to when she was little and scared. Her body sank into his like she had finally found where she belonged. The applause softened and faded into silence. Carter stood. Whether it was instinct or ego, I'll never know. He adjusted his jacket and cleared his throat like he was about to explain something. The kind of self-important gesture I'd seen too many times in courtrooms and company parties. But this time, no one looked at him. The microphone was still on the table. He reached for it, hesitated, then pulled his hand back. There was no recovering from this, no joke to ease the tension, no smooth transition to charm his way back into the spotlight. He picked up his drink and took a sip. No one toasted back. A few guests turned their chairs away. Some glanced toward the dance floor. One of the groomsmen stood and walked over to the bar, deliberately cutting off Carter's line of sight. He wasn't the center of the room anymore. He wasn't even part of the room. He had become the background noise, the hum of an old song no one listens to, only hears. Carter didn't storm out. That would have drawn attention. He hated losing control, but he hated being pitied more. So he did what men like him do when they're cornered. He disappeared. Quietly, with a forced smile, he slipped out the side door near the terrace. I watched him walk into the night like a man stepping away from a house he didn't build and never really lived in. Lila watched him go, but there was no pain in her eyes, only relief. She exhaled once, slow and clean, and turned back toward Jonah. Then something beautiful happened. The music returned. Not loud or jarring, just a gentle melody from the jazz band, something slow and warm, like the air had finally remembered how to breathe. Jonah led Lila back to the dance floor. Elias returned to my side, his arm resting softly around my back. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. People began to dance again, slowly at first, unsure of how to restart joy after such stillness. But joy, when it's real, knows how to find its way back. Leela laughed at something Jonah whispered. Her face opened up like the sun breaking through a storm. I hadn't seen that kind of laughter from her in years, maybe ever. She wasn't faking it anymore. She had walked through fire in front of everyone she loved, and instead of shrinking, she stood taller. Instead of being humiliated, she found power, not in revenge, not in shouting, but in truth. Real truth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need a microphone or a stage. It just needs to be spoken once, clearly and without apology. That was the moment she stopped being the girl who had been left behind. She became the woman who chose herself. And Carter? He became what he always feared most, unnecessary. The night ended with Lila barefoot on the grass, her heels in one hand and a sparkler in the other. The guests were laughing again, this time without hesitation. The dance floor glowed under string lights. Plates had been cleared, champagne had run dry, and the air had shifted from ceremony to celebration. Lila walked toward me as the last song faded. Her makeup had smudged slightly from the tears, but she had never looked more alive. She hugged me so tightly I felt her heartbeat against mine. I held her close, longer than usual. She pulled back just enough to look me in the eye and said, "Thank you, for never letting me believe I was what he made me feel like." I didn't answer with words. I just cupped her face in my hands and kissed her forehead. She didn't need a speech. She had given enough of those for one day. She had done what many grown women spend a lifetime trying to do. She stood in front of the wound and said, "This is not my fault." Elias walked up a moment later, quiet as always, holding her bouquet and smiling like a man who had just watched his daughter win something bigger than applause. She reached for him without hesitation and leaned into his chest like she had 100 times before. He rested his chin on the top of her head. I watched them and felt something tighten in my throat. This was the man who showed up when it counted, the man who stayed, the man who never asked for anything but gave everything. Lila never needed to call him Dad for him to be one. Later that evening, as the guests began to leave and the venue dimmed its lights, Jonah came over and thanked us, not just for the wedding or for raising Lila, but for what happened after the toast. He said, "Most people don't get to marry someone who already knows how to stand up for herself. You gave me a woman who knows her worth." That sentence stayed with me. People spend years trying to untangle themselves from the stories others wrote for them, stories about who they are, what they're worth, what they deserve. Carter tried to write one of those stories for Lila, but she tore it up in front of him, and in doing so, she gave herself a new ending, one that was honest, one that was hers. As for Carter, we haven't heard from him since that night. He didn't call. He didn't write. And that silence, for once, wasn't painful. It was peaceful. Not all absences are wounds. Some are gifts. In the weeks after the wedding, people kept calling, texting, writing notes. Some apologized for laughing. Others said they had never seen anything so brave. A few said they'd never be able to look at Carter the same way. I didn't respond to most of it. That moment wasn't about their guilt or their reflection. It was about Lila's freedom. She and Jonah went on their honeymoon a few days later. She called from the airport before they boarded. Her voice was calm, steady. She sounded lighter. I asked how she felt. She said, "I don't think I ever realized how much I was still carrying until I finally put it down." That's what healing sounds like. It doesn't always come in silence or solitude. Sometimes it comes in front of 100 people, in a borrowed microphone with a shaking hand and a steady heart. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a reckoning, a release, a reclaiming of identity. People say blood is thicker than water, but they forget that love is thicker than both. Elias wasn't Lila's father by blood, but he was there. Every day, in every way that mattered. And when the moment came to choose who she believed in, she chose him. That's what real love looks like. What happened at my daughter's wedding wasn't just a moment. It was a reminder. You are not defined by the people who fail you. You are not broken because someone else walked away. And you are never, ever damaged goods. You are worthy of love that shows up, love that listens, love that stays. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own journey or someone you care about, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. I read them, and so do others who are healing too. And if you want more stories about love, resilience, and finding your voice, subscribe to the channel. We're building a community where no one has to heal alone. Thank you for watching. You matter. You always did. Who?